Thank you very much. My question was what you read out from excerpt, sent by Mehnuri, where it says Shiva is the first soul to realize that he is God. So what was he before he realized he was God? So does that make, is he a God man or man God? So that makes a whole lot of difference.
Okay. What I'm
Because
saying
the Pura,
Ramnori, sorry for interruption. We are doing something which is an entirely different chapter now. Can we not do it on a one-to-one? Because these are, as Soumya says, these are very clinical question. It doesn't really, I would say, make us wiser. Obviously, he was the first soul to bake it. So his responsibility is to come back over and over again. So initially he was the man God, man becoming God, and subsequently he became the God man. This is how I would answer in short. But I don't want to, detract into a subject which is not our subject today. You are most welcome to call me one-on-one, and we can discuss it at length. Because
okay.
today, please. Today the subject is the problem of sex, which is such an interesting subject. So now let's continue with that. Soumya will start reading from False Promises of the Opposites. Please go ahead.
Thus, craving falsifies the operation of imagination and presents the mind with the option between the alternatives of indulgence and repression, which prove to be equally deceptive in their promise of happiness. However, in spite of alternate and repeated disappointment in indulgence as well as repression, the mind usually does not renounce the cause of unhappiness, which is craving. Hence, while experiencing disappointment in repression, it is easily susceptible to the false promise of gratification. And while experiencing disappointment in gratification, it is easily susceptible to the false promise of purely mechanical repression.
See, we have done before that in the domain of illusion or duality, we toggle between two finite opposites. We are jumping from one opposite to the other, never able to go beyond that. The reason being that we are caught up in imagination. Mind is supposed to think. When we say thinking mind, it means thinking in the process of annihilating itself. When mind is thinking of doing the process of annihilation of itself, then it is in the right direction. When mind is imagining things, then it is in the so-called or apparent false or wrong direction. Now, the chapter is false promises of opposites. We indulge because there is a gratification, there is a promise of the craving that we will find happiness. But we get fed up of that, and then we have mechanical repression, and we get fed up with mechanical repression, and this is how it goes on till the mind is awakened to a place beyond the duality of opposites. So here Baba says, thus craving falsifies the operation of imagination. As it is, imagination is a falsification of truth. So your craving even falsifies the operation of imagination and presents the mind with the option between the alternatives of indulgence and repression, which prove to be equally deceptive in their promise of happiness. Basically, whatever we do, the bottom line is, Deepa, Daima, thank you, darling. Were you yawning or what? I don't know. But anyway, thanks for muting the mic. The point is, what Baba is trying to convey is that we are caught up in the duality of so many things, not just indulgence and repression, good and bad, high and low, beautiful and ugly, and everything that is of duality is in the domain of illusion. It has no reality. It has no perenniality. It is not perpetual. It is all transient. It is all impermanent. And we are running after mirage, falsification, false process of imagination. So Baba says, however, in spite of alternate and repeated disappointment in indulgence, as well as in repression, the mind usually does not renounce the cause of unhappiness, which is craving. The cause of all unhappiness is, in one sense or the other, ignorance of the true nature of the self. And one of the aspects of ignorance is craving, is desiring, is longing, all that. So, because we have not gone to the cause of real unhappiness, which is craving, we are shuttling or oscillating between the two opposites. Hence, while experiencing disappointment in repression, it is easily susceptible to the false promise of gratification. And while experiencing disappointment in gratification, it is easily susceptible to the false promise of purely mechanical repression.
Renunciation of craving through awakening. This is like moving within a cage. The gateway to the spiritual path of internal and spontaneous renunciation of craving remains closed for those who have not the good fortune to be awakened by a perfect master. True awakening is the entering into the path of wisdom, which in course of time surely leads to the freedom and abiding happiness of life eternal. Internal and spontaneous renunciation of craving is as different from mechanical repression as it is from indulgence. Mind turns to the mechanical repression of craving because of disappointment, but it turns to internal and spontaneous renunciation of craving because of disillusionment or awakening.
We've done this before, that man does not take to the search of God as a joyous and voluntary enterprise. He is driven to it through the disappointments with the things of the world. And my personal take is, I don't think any of us are awakened in that sense by the grace of Baba, awakened in the sense that we really know the true nature of the self, the true nature of things around us, so as not to tempt us to be, in a sense, seduced or to be attracted by things outside of us. So here Baba says that this is like moving within a cage. And what is that cage? The cage of our samskaras, the cage of duality. The gateway to the spiritual path of internal and spontaneous renunciation of craving remains closed for those who have not the good fortune to be awakened by a perfect master. Once we are in close proximity of the perfect master, and by close proximity, I don't mean physical proximity, internal proximity, which means constant, wholehearted remembrance of Baba to a point where we are forgetting our own self and behaving as a very effective, efficient instrument in the hands of Baba to do his will. When that, over a period of time happens, then perhaps we may be awakened to the reality of things, which will only be by his grace. So true awakening is the entering into the path of wisdom, And wisdom, by normal way of looking at it, is putting into action, putting into practice the little intellect or little information or knowledge that we have. Knowledge placed into action is wisdom, which in due course of time, which in course of time surely leads to the freedom and abiding happiness of eternal life. So it is only in the application, practical application of what we are theoretically learning that will step by step help us towards the path, towards the reality, towards awakening. Not by reading. I may read a few hundred books, you may listen to a few hundred books or read so many books or be absolutely, we can say, proficient in talking or giving all the bhashan and all that. But from Baba's point of view, from spiritual standpoint, it is a big zero. It has no value. It only assumes value when we are able to internalize those things, when we are able to apply those things in our moment to moment living. Moment to moment living opens up great vistas for us to put into practice what we have studied theoretically. You see, so basically, it is not, as we say, that an ounce of practice is worth more than a pound of preaching or something like that. So, teaching, preaching, talking, listening is on one side. It may help, may not help, but the most important thing is the application of that in our day to day living. So, here Baba says that true awakening is the entering into the path of wisdom, which in due course of time surely leads to the freedom and abiding happiness of eternal life. What we have happiness is a very fleeting happiness. Something we gain, something we got, something we were hunting for and we got that in our hand. We are happy for a very short time. Again, we are unhappy. We want something else. But here Baba talks about abiding happiness. We are constantly, perennially happy, and that is only when we have the you can say the good fortune of being able to evaluate and give value to different aspects of our life. Why we are not really happy is because our valuation system is flawed, is lopsided, and that is why we give certain things value which in truth has very little value. For example, the craving. As Baba has said, that when you are craving for something, let it be anything. When we talk about sex or lust, it doesn't mean just physical sex. You may be craving to have a property, craving to have some position, or craving to have some food, whatever, And when that craving is there, you tend, one, to over evaluate the objective value of that thing because of your subjective interest in that thing, because of your subjective attachment to that thing, because we have now become a slave to that thing, and that is why we are evaluating it much higher than the real value. So once we learn the art of evaluating things in the right measure of evaluation, then by and large, again, we will turn to a so-called state of equanimity, equipoise, or even a state of happiness. Here, what Baba says is, uh, if the mind, sorry, oh, I, thank you, thank you, surely leads to freedom and abiding happiness of life eternal, internal and spontaneous renunciation. So Baba is emphasizing on number one, internal renunciation, which means externally you may be really hectic in your activity on the external front, running about here and there, making business, making money, doing this, doing that. But internally, you are having renunciation, means you are not attached to it. It does not affect you. That is the meaning of internal renunciation. And what is spontaneous renunciation? Many of us make mechanical renunciation, or we studied, you can say, studied renunciation. oh, this is wrong, this is bad, so I will not do it. It may help, but it will not last long. It has to be spontaneous. It is something like you can have a mango pluck, you know, kacha, raw, and then you may put some, powder or some acid or something like that and ripen it. It looks ripened. It may even taste ripened, but that is not the real mango. The real mango is when it is ripened on the tree, and then it falls automatically, or you just take it at the right time. My understanding would be that it must come to us internally through an internal awakening, that I need to now spontaneously renounce a certain thing or a certain activity. Because if it is not internal, if it is not spontaneous, then it will be very short-lived. It will come. You will force yourself to do or not to do a certain thing, but it may perhaps not help. This is my take. So here Baba says that internal, all right, internal and spontaneous renunciation of craving is as different from mechanical repression as it is from indulgence. That means what is important, everything is from inside out. Everything has to be planned on the drawing board, which is within. If the planning within is correct, then the manifestation of it without, that means outside, will also be noble, beautiful, worthwhile. If internally you do not have that josh, that gut feeling of transformation or whatever, then irrespective of how you may do in a studied manner, in a mechanical manner, in my understanding, it will finally land up in Gujarati we say, what is it? Baba kahan to jana tha. Where we were before, it will lend us to where at the right beginning of where we were. So everything has to start from within, internal and spontaneous. See, Baba's choice of words, they are so profound. So here Baba says, okay, mind turns to the mechanical repression of craving because of disappointment, but it turns to internal and spontaneous renunciation of craving because of delusion, disillusionment or awakening. So you may turn to internal and spontaneous renunciation because you meaning when I say you, it means I also, because I am one of you. As we say, as Erach uncle would say, lingering. Somebody would ask you, how are you? You say lingering. So in the same way, we are all struggling, if not lingering. We are all struggling. So we are all in the same boat. So what Baba says is that unless that we turn to the internal and spontaneous renunciation because of one utter, total, thorough disillusionments with the things of the world. We have tried A, B, C, D, X, Y, Z, and we are so utterly disillusioned that you feel that there's no other way but to go the so-called right way or through awakening. And that awakening is nothing but a grace of the perfect master or the avatar, who's the eternal living perfect master. These are the two ways in which we can transform ourselves into having internal and spontaneous renunciation of craving. And by craving, it means all the cravings. And it does not mean that if an ice cream is given to you, you will not eat and you will not enjoy. Or if you are a non-vegetarian, a chicken lollipop is given to you, you will not enjoy. No, it doesn't mean that. It simply means you are not attached to it. It simply means you don't crave for it. It simply means when you don't get it, you are not disappointed. It simply means that you enjoy everything that you get, but you are not attached to it. This is my take on what I've learned from Baba's teachings. Go ahead.
Understanding craving. The need for indulgence or mechanical repression arises only when the nature of craving is not clearly grasped. When aspirants become fully awake to the inevitable bondage and suffering entailed by craving, they begin voluntarily to disburden themselves of craving through intelligent understanding. The question of indulgence or repression arises only when there is craving. The need for both vanishes with the complete disappearance of craving. When the mind is free from craving, the mind can no longer be moved by the false promises of indulgence or mechanical repression.
So here Baba says, the sub paragraph is understanding craving. Now we must understand. Okay, I'm just digressing from what is there. Why the craving? The craving is because there is a samskar deep down within us of some past experience which had given me a sensation of joy, happiness, peace, tranquility, blah blah. Try to understand, and this is the oft repeated example that I give, and I quote my dear friend Sam Patel. Now, assuming that Sam and I are walking at, say, Kulaba Causeway, just walking, and we come across a beer bar, and there is a board there which says Rustamji Beer Bar. Now, for those who have heard me, they will say, "Arey Baba, you are saying the same thing over and over again." Now, my dear friend Sam is a teetotaler. He has never touched whiskey, brandy, beer, whatever it is. So he just reads it and nothing happens to him. Nothing. No flutter. Now, assuming that I am a Beura, I am a drunkard. And so the moment I see Rustamji Beer Bar, something happens in me, within me, that urge, that longing, that craving to enter and have a glass of beer. Now, the question here is objectively, externally, everything remains the same, constant. Rustamji Beer Bar, nothing. I feel the urge and the craving to have, whereas my friend does not feel the urge and the craving to have, means that subjectively means in my own mental makeup, I have something in me which has triggered something in me which has created this craving to have the beer. Now, what is that something which has triggered me? My samskara, my samskaras or my impression. Now, what caused my samskara? A past action whereby I had a glass or two or whatever of drink and I felt absolutely out of the world. I felt I was in heaven. So I want to repeat that experience. And therefore I have the craving, whereas he does not. Am I making sense? So now this craving, if I am able to understand through, as I said, through disillusionments. Now, I'll give another example. The other day, I was joking with my friend Ram Nori, chalo, let us have a drink. And he said, no, 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 because I know he enjoys. But he said, no, no, no. Why? Because he has just gotten up from some illness and his doctor has warned him, you dare not have a drink, otherwise it will have a very bad repercussion on your own health. So now what has happened? Actually, this has happened to me because I am undergoing a treatment of an allergist. And the moment first thing he asked, do you have alcohol? And as usual, we don't say yes or no. Oh, it's a social drink once in a way. He said, stop it. Oh my God. So I have also stopped it over more than a year back. So I fall in the same category of my friend Ram Nori. What I'm trying to say is, internally now, this is a forced, mechanical, external repression. You see, now the moment the so-called, what should I say, the restriction would be removed, I might jump up and have something, might or might not, I do not know. What Baba is trying to say here is that with the with the understanding of craving. Why is it that I am craving for ABC? And somebody else who's sitting next to me, or like as I said, God gave the example of Sam Patel. He doesn't feel it. Why? Because he doesn't have those samskaras. You see, so your Baba says understanding craving. So it is not just for sex, because we are doing that chapter, or not just for having whatever, mutton or chicken or smoke or tobacco or whatever it is. It is for all categories of cravings. Cravings arise because there is already an inherent samskar within us. And that samskar was caused because of a past action. So when we understand the nature of the craving, then with certain application of wisdom, we can modulate it, we can alter it, we can change it, and we can overcome it. Awakening by the grace of the perfect master is a totally different ball game. That's a different matter altogether. Immediately it happens and you know the nature of craving and you just throw it out because it has no meaning. It is something like a small girl, a young girl would be so attached to her Barbie doll, so attached, she would clothe her, she would give her bath, she would do the hairdo and stuff like that, And then when she grows up, she's not no more attached to it because she knows that it is just a piece of whatever, plastic or whatever it is. It is not having life. It is, and so she may even throw it out. The moment the knowledge comes, the detachment comes, you just throw it out unhesitatingly. In the same way, with the grace of Baba, when that wisdom comes, when that awakening comes, everything falls in place. We exactly know the real value of everything in our life, and automatically there will be spontaneous and internal renunciation of all those things because of the awakening. Coming back to our reading, understanding craving. The need for indulgence or mechanical repression arises only when the nature of craving is not clearly grasped. We do not know why am I feeling like this? Why all of a sudden I just get the urge to have something or to do something or whatever it may be, it could be eating, it could be seeing a movie, it could be seeing a nice view or something, whatever it is all craving. It comes under the category of craving. So because the nature is not clearly grasped, when aspirants fully awake to the inevitable bondage and suffering entailed by craving, every craving has a price. You have to pay a price. And the price, Baba says, is that you are bound by it. There is a bondage and there is a suffering. If you get it, then also you want to have more of it, or you get so satiated that you don't want anything of it. And therefore, in either way, you are courting suffering. So Baba says that inevitably it will lead to bondage and suffering. They begin the once we realize that this craving is leading me to bondage and suffering, then they begin voluntarily to disburden themselves. One by one, we are throwing away, disburdening ourselves of the craving, thus disburden themselves of craving through intelligent understanding. So the example that I gave about beer, once you intelligently understand why is it that I am behaving the way I am behaving? Why is it that I am giving so much additional weightage and importance to a certain person or a thing in my life, which is causing craving in it? Then you will have a balanced way of looking at it. The question of indulgence or repression arises only when there is craving. In other words, when there is no craving, there is nothing to be indulging in and there is nothing to be craving about. It just comes to you naturally, you do it. I remember an instance, of course, this has nothing to do with what we are doing, but we are very set in our thinking about vegetarian and non-vegetarian. And this is what I heard from Don Stevens. And by the way, today is Don Stevens' death anniversary. So this is by the by. So Don said that when Baba was in the West, we all know that in the coming month, 24th of May 1952, Baba orchestrated a self-imposed suffering upon himself by way of an accident at Oklahoma, Prague, USA. At that time, Baba was seen eating steak. We all know what steak is. If people do not know, it is cow's meat. And when somebody asked Baba, how is it that you are eating this? And Baba, so beautifully, in a detached manner, said, my body at this point in time requires high proteins, and I am just giving my body that. So it was such a detached way of consuming a certain thing which we feel, oh, how is it that God is eating that? So what I'm trying to say is, Baba never asks us to refrain from enjoying life in a normal, natural course. He never said that. Baba simply says there should be no craving, there should be no attachment, because craving leads to bondage and suffering. As simple as that. Coming back to the reading, the need for both vanishes, that means indulgence and repression, vanishes with the complete disappearance of craving. Again, I am repeating, complete disappearance of craving does not mean that you will not enjoy a nice meal or a good scene scenery and all that. It simply means as it comes naturally, you enjoy and then you forget about it. You don't give any weightage to it. You are not bound by it. You are not attached to it. When the mind is free from craving, the mind can no longer be moved by the false promises of indulgence and mechanical repression. We'll do one more paragraph and then we'll open up for question answers if there are any.
Restraint nearer to freedom than indulgence. However, it should be borne in mind that the life of freedom is nearer to the life of restraint than to the life of indulgence, though in quality it is essentially different from both. Hence, for aspirants, a life of strict celibacy is preferred to married life if restraint comes to them easily without undue sense of self-repression. Such restraint is difficult for most persons and sometimes impossible, and for them, married life is decidedly more helpful than a life of celibacy. For ordinary persons, married life is undoubtedly advisable unless they have a special aptitude for celibacy.
Now, Baba is straight on coming to married life versus celibacy. And Baba says that definitely of the two, if you can naturally, spontaneously, without undue repression, have a natural yearning towards celibate life, then that is definitely better from the spiritual standpoint. But if you can't, Baba has given some example, that when you start flying, you fly like a swan and do not flit from one branch to another like a sparrow, something like that. So if you cannot restrain yourself naturally and spontaneously, then the best alternative would be to be married. So here that is what the paragraph reads. Restraint nearer to freedom than indulgence. That means if you can naturally and spontaneously, without undue oppression and repression, have restraint, then it is definitely nearer to freedom than married life. If not, then married life is equally potential from a spiritual standpoint, and it will give you equal boost to spirituality if the norms of married life are followed. Restraint nearer to freedom than indulgence. However, it should be borne in mind that the life of freedom is nearer to the life of restraint than to the life of indulgence, though in quality it is essentially different from both. That means in quality, the life of restraint is essentially different from the life of indulgence and the life of repression. Hence, for aspirants, that means aspirants would be those who are aspiring for a spiritual life, those who are aspiring and longing to see God and to become with God. It's a
One
very,
with God.
to become one, sorry, to become one with God. We use the term aspirant in a very loose way. My personal feeling is that unless and until we have an absolute transformation in the way we think about life, then only we can one can call himself an aspirant. That means he is on his way to spiritualize to realization, and not anybody who is doing some jap tap or nam jap or even doing some kinds of rites, rituals, ceremonies, following some religious dogmas. I personally feel that you cannot nomenclate that person an aspirant. It has to be a total transformation in his way of being in order to be one focused, on being able to see God and become one with Him. So here Baba says, hence for aspirant, a life of strict celibacy is preferable to married life if, now this is important, if restraint comes to them easily without undue sense of repression. Because if there is a repression, which is mechanical repression. It is something like when it's like a spring. If you press a spring mechanically, then at one fine day, at one fine moment, in one weak moment, the spring would just blast up, and that would be the end of the story. So, in other words, Baba says if restraint comes naturally and without self repression, such restraint is difficult for most persons and sometimes impossible. So it is impossible to have such spontaneous restraint for most people, and even for others, it is most difficult. And for them, married life is decidedly more helpful than a life of celibacy. Many times people feel that, oh, married means now spiritually you are gone. It's nothing like that. Baba says it's a wrong notion. Married life has got so much potential for spirituality. In fact, Baba has arranged marriages of so many people in his own circle of disciples. I don't want to name any, but the one that comes to my mind is Rustam Irani, the very first one where he was asked to marry Mera's sister, Freni. Actually, her name was Piroja, but then changed to Freni. So, and there are many, many others. We don't want to get into marriage making at the moment, but Baba did recommend and match up quite a few people in his own darbar. So coming back to your, okay, for ordinary persons, married life is undoubtedly advisable unless they have a special aptitude for celibacy. All right, any any questions so far, or we can go ahead? No questions, so we'll go ahead.
Possibilities of celibacy or marriage. Just as the life of celibacy requires and calls forth the development of many virtues, married life in turn also nourishes the growth of many spiritual qualities of utmost importance. The value of celibacy lies in the habit of restraint and the sense of detachment and independence it gives. But as long as the mind is not altogether free from craving, there is no true freedom. In the same way, the value of marriage lies in the lessons of mutual adjustment and the sense of unity with the other. True union or dissolution of duality is possible, however, only through divine love, which can never dawn as long as there is the slightest shadow of lust or craving in the mind. Only by treading the path of inner and spontaneous renunciation of craving is it possible to attain true freedom and unity.
So the subparagraph is possibilities of celibacy or marriage. Just as the life of celibacy requires and calls forth the development of many virtues, married life in turn also nourishes the growth of many spiritual qualities of utmost importance. For those who are married, and I'm sure there are many in this group, we all know what all qualities. I'm not talking about just the men, by the way. What all qualities we are expected to develop of forbearance, each other, of tolerance, of keeping mum when the other person is talking too much. And that, so these are all the qualities which otherwise we could never have developed, and which we get the scope and the potential of developing. And by we, I don't mean just the male gender, even the female. There is a nice, what was that? I forgot that before marriage, the boy feels that the girl will not change, and the girl feels that the boy will change, something like that. But actually, what happens is after marriage, the lady changes and the man remains the same, something of that sort. Anyway, just on a lighter vein. So what Baba is trying to say, that marriage is a very important, sacred institution with a lot of scope of improvement, of spiritualizing our life by holding on to each other, by loving each other, by tolerating each other, by forbearance of each other, by forgiving each other, by working as one unit in life. It's not two souls, but one unit. So all these qualities which do not get scope for development, for blossoming in outside marriage, we get scope to the the the, the scope of remaining silent. You see, such a great scope, where you would like to speak and lash out, but you choose to be silent. I'm talking from both point of view, both points of view. So all these get developed, in a married life. So here Baba says, okay, just as, okay, the value of celibacy lies in the habit of restraint and the sense of detachment and independence it gives. When you are leading a celibacy life, a celibate life, there is an absolute sense of detachment and an absolute sense of independence. That means there is no dependence on the other person's physical aspect in order to get joy or pleasure or whatever. There is independence. There is no attachment. There is detachment. That is the value of celibacy. But as long as the mind is not altogether free from craving, there is no true freedom. That means true freedom comes only when the mind is free from craving. Like Baba says that there is no point in going to the Himalayas or the caves or the jungle because the mind is craving. And when the mind is not craving, there is no need for having any kind of external renunciation. You can remain in the world, remain in your home, do your office, do your business, mingle with everybody, but there is internal renunciation. Why? Because there is no craving. So, in other words, whether you are enjoying a life of renunciation or a life of bondage depends upon whether you are free from craving or not free from craving. When I say we, which means the mind, whether the mind is free from craving or not free from craving, and it does not depend upon whether you are a celibate or whether you are in married life, whether you are in the hub of the city or whether you are in some far-flung jungle or cave or mountain or whatever it is. It does not make any difference. The important thing is the mind. Is it free from craving or is it bound by craving? So that is what Baba says. Such restraint is difficult. Okay, for all, sorry, the value of celibacy, all that we've done. But as long as the mind is not altogether free from craving, there is no true freedom. In the same way, the value of marriage lies in the lessons of mutual adjustment. By mutual adjustment means adjustment between a husband and a wife. Adjust if you are living in a joint family, then between so many members of your family. If you have beget children, then it is also mutual adjustment between the children. And the sense of unity with the other. You feel a sense of oneness. True union or dissolution of duality is possible, however, only through divine love. Only when the grace of God bestows upon us the gift of divine love, only then we will be able to really recognize and appreciate and experience true unity or oneness. Otherwise, it is all, you can say, not true unity. So here Baba says true union or delusion of duality. Duality is completely annihilated, is possible, however, only through divine love, which can never dawn as long as there is the slightest shadow of lust or craving in the mind. That means the craving or the lust is the restricting factor, the badha, the inhibiting factor for the divine love to flow to us as his gift. Only by treading the path of inner and spontaneous renunciation, bar bar, over and over again, Baba is emphasizing on inner renunciation and spontaneous renunciation. Only by treading the path of inner and spontaneous renunciation of craving is it possible to attain true freedom and unity. So here Baba is advising, advocating about inner and spontaneous freedom. Any questions? We still have time, of course, 10 minutes. No question. So now, just to make light of this talk, this is, please take it in a very lighter way, no religious sentiment involved. Once, in some very important prestigious church, you know a new whosoever head of the church was appointed, and all through we've been told, I'm talking about one religion, but it applies to everybody, because even Baba advocates celibacy, to be a celibate. So the head of that institution is arranging for one very senior person to say, I would like to personally read the scribe in which the Lord, the scripture, okay, the scripture where the Lord has advocated celibacy. I would like to personally read it. So he sends a man, it's a dungeon, it's a deep down where that particular, whatever you call it, the manuscript, the original manuscript has been housed and kept secret and sacred. So the man goes down and, many hours go by, but the man doesn't come up. One day goes, 2 days go, he doesn't come up. So the head of the department is very worried. So he's sending somebody down to see, Baba, what happened to that man? I just told him to bring the scripture so that I can personally read it, you know. And when that second man goes down, he sees that the first person is banging his head on a table, banging, 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 and keeps on repeating, R is missing, R is missing, R is missing. He doesn't understand. What is this R is missing? So then it dawned, you know, then when he was asked, what are you talking about? So he said, the Lord was not talking about celibate, he was talking about celebrate. So instead of celebrating, we are we are celebrating. You understand what I'm saying? So of course, this is in a very lighter vein that Lord expects all of us to celebrate life. And in order to celebrate life, it may be necessary for us to be a celibate. By celibate, I don't mean that you don't get married, you know, by having lesser and lesser of craving. So that was the so-called joke that I just remembered about celibate and celebrate. We still have 10 minutes more to go, and since there are no questions, I would like to continue with the reading.
Path of perfection open through celibacy or marriage. For those who are celibate as well as for married persons, the path of inner life is the same. When aspirants are drawn by the truth, they long for nothing else. And as the truth increasingly comes within their ken, they gradually disburden themselves of craving. When in celibacy or in marriage, they are no longer swayed by the deceptive promises of indulgence or mechanical repression, and they practice internal and spontaneous renunciation of craving until they are freed from the deceptive opposites. The path of perfection is open to aspirants, whether in celibacy or in marriage, and whether they begin from celibacy or from marriage will depend upon their sanskaras and karmic ties of the past. They cheerfully accept the conditions that their past lives have determined for them and utilize these conditions for spiritual advancement in the light of the ideal they have come to perceive.
So here Baba is giving a balanced view that the spiritual path is open for those who are celibate as well as those who celebrate. Let's put it that way, as well as those who are married. So it's open. It's not that it is closed for married people and open. And then Baba goes on to say, finally, of course, we'll be reading this, that whatever we choose, either to be a natural, spontaneous celibate or married life, will ultimately depend upon your own samskaras. And our own samskaras are nothing but the film that we have already filmed in the past, the role of which is now manifesting in the real time world, on the screen of our consciousness. So what we are today is nothing but the result of our past karmas or samskaras. Okay. What does Baba say? Path of perfection open through celibacy or marriage. We have seen in the past that sometimes it was like, for example, Tukaram. I have not read his entire life story, but I know that Tukaram's wife, in our terminology, was harassing him a lot. But in spiritual terminology, it was the wife who was instrumental in Tukaram's perfection because of detachment, because of disillusionment, because of dropping all the cravings and all the lust of life. You know, lust doesn't mean just sex. Lust means everything. Lust for eating, lust for drinking, lust for name, lust for fame, lust for making money, whatever. You know. So in other words, marriage is also equally potential in leading one towards perfection. And by that, I don't mean only the men, even the women, can reach perfection through marriage, through the institution of marriage or through celibacy. So here Baba says, path of perfection open through celibacy or marriage. For those who are celibate, as well as for married persons, the path of inner life is the same. That means there are no two paths. That okay, this is for the celibate and this is for the one who is married. Nothing of that sort. It is the same. When aspirants are drawn by the truth, they long for nothing else. And as the truth increasingly comes within their ken, that means within their understanding, they gradually disburden themselves of craving. So, here the first thing is that we must be attracted towards the truth. See, there are two ways. Somebody had asked Baba, that truth will eventually come. Should I drop my untruth or negativity or craving or whatever you call it, desire, so that I can find the truth? That is one way. And the second way is that I should be so enamored, so attracted by the truth that naturally, spontaneously, automatically, all that is untruth will fall apart. It will just fall off. And Baba advocated the second part, that you should be so attracted towards the truth that everything other than the truth does not make any interest, does not give any interest to you, it doesn't make any sense to you, and automatically they will drop off through neglect, because the other part is also there, but that's a negative way, that's the negative way of coming to the truth. So the positive way is to first create a longing for truth. I don't know how many of us would be having that, because that is the first step, let's put it that way. As Baba beautifully said earlier in one of the discourses, that to tread, that means to walk, to tread the spiritual path is not at all difficult. To make a decision to tread the path is difficult. Because once we have decided that this life of mine in this physical body is meant to find the truth, once we have decided, that takes a lifetime or maybe several hundred lifetimes or thousand lifetimes to decide. Because once we have decided, then everything falls into place. Then everything just arranges itself in such a manner that we are only facing the truth and we are only forwarding ourselves towards the truth, and the so-called untruth automatically falls off. You don't have to tear it out of our being to fall it off. It will automatically fall off. All that desires, all the cravings will automatically fall off. So here, I remember, I think it was Rakesh Acharya who wrote to me that you have to long for desirelessness or desire only to have desire. But he said only this is, that also is a desire, that also is a longing. And I replied to him on a personal chat was that yes, that is a longing, that is a desire, but it's a significant longing, a significant desire which will put an end to all other desires. But yes, at the end of the journey, even that desire, even that longing of becoming one with the Lord has to be relinquished, has to be dropped, has to be renunciated. Yeah. Tarke dunya, tarke maula, tarke ukba, tarke tar. Tarke dunya, renounce this world. Tarke ukba means renounce the other world. Tarke maula means you renounce the religion and your so-called spiritual path and whatever. Tarke tar means renounce the very thought that you have renounced. Only then you reach the goal. Coming back to our reading, yeah. In the same way, the value of marriage lies in the lessons of mutual adjustment and the sense of unity. Oh, I thought, oh, I'm sorry. I always, whether in celibacy or in marriage, they are no longer swayed by the deceptive promises. That means the craving is not there. By the deceptive promises of indulgence or mechanical repression. And they practice, again, Baba uses the word internal and spontaneous renunciation of craving unless they are freed from all deceptive opposites. All opposites are deceptive because all opposites are in the domain of duality. Everything is in the domain of duality is an illusion. So unless the illusion is dropped, the truth or the reality cannot manifest itself. The path of perfection is open to aspirants, whether in celibacy or in marriage, and whether they begin from celibacy or from marriage, irrespective of that, from where you started, it has to start from there, and the path is the same. Will depend upon whether you start from celibacy or marriage, will depend upon their samskaras and karmic ties of the past. So, in other words, it is the past samskaras which will determine in the present life whether you will lead a life of celibacy or lead a life, married life. They cheerfully accept the conditions that their past lives have determined for them and utilize these conditions for spiritual advancement. We have to utilize the conditions in which we are placed in this life for our spiritual advancement in the light of the ideal that have come to pursue, that they have come to pursue. In other words, wherever we are, whatever we have to start from that the spiritual journey. Any questions? We've already exceeded 3 minutes, but that's fine. No. Carlet, it is so nice to see you after a long, long time. All right. Any
You guys
questions?
too.
Yeah,
Nice to
yeah.
see both of you.
Good to see you
Jai
too.
Baba.
All right. So I think we call it a day. Thank you, Baba, for this wisdom. Let us hope that we put into practice a little bit of what we are learning. Thank you, Baba. Thanks to all of you. Avtar Meher Baba ki Jai. Jai Baba. Thank you, Baba. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Thank you.
Jai Baba.